Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be talking about scientific research, and specifically the different types of research that are out there. We've got two really interesting sources. We've got a research methodology textbook, and we also have this fascinating presentation about the scientific method. So hopefully we can kind of compare and contrast what those sources have to say, maybe uncover some interesting insights along the way.
It's funny right off the bat. One of the first things the textbook does is it kind of plays with that word research. It mentions how it's really research, like you're searching again for something. And, in a way, that is kind of what we're doing as researchers. But I'm guessing there's more to it than just, Googling something a couple times.
Right. Like, I feel like if that was all it took to be a researcher, then, anyone could do it. The textbook also mentions this idea of systematic investigation. So I think there's got to be more to it than just, searching for something again.
Yeah, there's definitely a structure and a purpose behind it. It's about really trying to understand something better, whether that's by verifying something we already know or maybe discovering something totally new. It's not just about looking stuff up. It's about using a very deliberate and intentional approach.
I guess that makes me think about all the times I've been curious about something and gone down like a rabbit hole on the internet trying to learn everything I could. And sometimes that starts to feel like research. Like that need to know more. Is that kind of like a driving force behind all research, would you say?
Absolutely. It's that inherent curiosity, that drive to understand the world around us. And the textbook lays out some of the main reasons why we do research. They talk about things like describing a phenomenon or diagnosing a problem. They even talk about exploring new areas or testing specific predictions.
So it can be about describing something. It can be about figuring out why something happens. It could be about venturing into the unknown. Wow, that's already a lot broader than I thought.
Exactly. And one example that they give in the textbook is, does discussing personal problems with students lead to better teacher-student relationships? That's a research question that you could investigate.
Oh, that's interesting. And that makes me think about all the different types of research that are out there. The textbook mentions qualitative versus quantitative, philosophical, historical, even survey research. Like, how do we even begin to make sense of all these different approaches?
Right. It can definitely feel overwhelming at first, but I think the presentation actually gives us a good framework for understanding this. They talk about pure research versus applied research.
Okay.
So pure research is kind of like, think of it as that drive to just understand the world around us. So like a scientist studying the intricacies of cell division, for example.
So just figuring stuff out for the sake of figuring it out. That's so simple.
And then applied research is more about taking that knowledge and using it to solve specific problems. So like developing a new cancer treatment based on our understanding of cell division.
So that's where we start to see research having a real impact, like on our health in that case. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and the presentation delves even deeper into the steps of the scientific method. And they really emphasize experimentation as this core aspect of research.
So is all research experimental? I feel like there are other ways to investigate things.
You're absolutely right. Experimentation is definitely crucial in a lot of fields, especially in something like engineering where you're really trying to control variables and isolate cause and effect. But you also have things like historical research where you're examining existing records, trying to understand the past.
It's like being a detective of the past.
Exactly.
That's so cool. But the presentation also mentions some things about computer science and how there are some misconceptions around that being scientific research.
Right. And it's this ongoing debate about whether computer science is really a science or more of an engineering discipline, because it deals with these systems that we created ourselves. So some people argue that it's not really studying the natural world.
But computer scientists still conduct experiments, don't they?
Absolutely.
Like testing different algorithms or evaluating software designs.
Yeah, those are all forms of experimentation within computer science. The key is that you have a testable hypothesis, and you have this rigorous process for gathering and analyzing data.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a better sense of how diverse scientific research really is. But I'm curious to hear more about these different types of research. And you know how they're used to answer specific questions?
Let's do it. It's like having a whole toolkit for knowledge discovery. You got to know which tool to use for the job.
All right, let's expand that toolkit then.
So when we're talking about these different types of research, the textbook kind of breaks it down by the type of information you're looking for. So you've got qualitative research, which is really about exploring experiences and meanings, things that aren't so easy to quantify. And then you've got quantitative research, which is all about the numbers and statistics.
So qualitative is more about the why, and quantitative is more about the how much.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. So let's say you're researching the impact of social media on teenagers. You could take a qualitative approach and do interviews to understand their experiences. Or you could take a quantitative approach and analyze screen time data and correlate that with academic performance or mental well-being.
Oh, so you're saying you could actually use both approaches to study the same topic?
Exactly. They both offer valuable insights.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What other types of research are there?
Well, the textbook also talks about philosophical research, which is all about those big questions like knowledge and reality and existence. It's very theoretical.
So like the stuff that keeps philosophers up at night.
Pretty much. And then you've got historical research, which we touched on earlier. That's about trying to understand the past by looking at primary sources.
So like historical documents and artifacts and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that can actually involve both qualitative and quantitative approaches.
Oh, interesting. So a historian could read someone's diary to get a sense of their lived experience, but they could also look at population data from that time period.
Exactly. And then another type of research is survey research, which is primarily quantitative. It's about gathering information about current events or trends.
So like opinion polls and market research surveys.
Exactly.
And then finally, we have experimental research, which we talked about earlier, where you're trying to control all the variables to test cause and effect.
Right. That's where the scientific method really comes into play.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. It's amazing to see all the different ways you could approach research. But with all these different options, how do you know which one to use?
That's a great question. It really depends on what you're trying to find out. Like if you want to understand people's experiences, then qualitative methods like interviews would be a good fit. But if you're testing a hypothesis about cause and effect, then an experimental approach would be more appropriate.
So it's all about using the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these aren't always hard and fast categories. Sometimes there's overlap. And researchers often combine different approaches to get a more complete picture.
That makes sense. It's not always black and white.
Yeah.
But I'm still kind of stuck on that point about computer science and whether it's really research.
Yeah, that's a really interesting debate. Because computer science deals with systems that we created, some people argue that it's not really a science in the traditional sense.
Right, like it's not studying the natural world.
Exactly. But computer scientists are still using scientific methods to test their ideas.
Right, like with algorithms and software design.
Yeah, they have to be very systematic and rigorous in their approach.
I guess what I'm learning is that research is much more complex and nuanced than I realized.
It definitely is, and that's what makes it so fascinating. It's this constant process of exploring and discovering, trying to make sense of the world around us.
I feel like we've really gone deep on this one. I mean, we've covered so many different types of research, and it's really fascinating to see how they all fit together.
Yeah, it's like this big puzzle, and each type of research is a different piece. But when you put them all together, you start to get a more complete picture of the world.
And it's not just about understanding the world, is it? It's also about making it better.
Absolutely.
I mean, think about all the things we take for granted, like smartphones and medicines and even the way we learn. All of those things came about because of research.
Exactly. Someone had to ask the questions and then figure out how to find the answers.
Right. And sometimes those answers lead to amazing breakthroughs.
It's true. And it's not just scientists in labs who are doing this. Anyone can be a researcher. If you're curious about something and you want to learn more, that's the first step.
So what you're saying is everyone has the potential to be a researcher.
Absolutely. It's all about that curiosity and that drive to learn.
I love that. So to everyone listening out there, what will you investigate? What mysteries are you going to unravel?
Yeah. What problems are you going to solve?
This has been an amazing deep dive, and I hope everyone listening has learned as much as I have.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep diving deep.